You can buy a ticket to the middle of the Pacific, but you cannot bribe the ecosystem. Yet, put thousands of people on a floating resort, and someone will inevitably try to negotiate with a volcano. This collection of 12 documented incidents explores a very specific delusion. What happens when travelers expect wild animals and atmospheric physics to act like paid cruise line staff? 1. Brenda from Chicago booked a 14-night Hawaiian island hopper on one of the major American cruise lines for one singular, uncompromising reason. She wanted to photograph glowing lava flowing into the Pacific Ocean. She had prepared for this moment with the intensity of a military contractor, packing a titanium tripod, 3 different light meters, and a telephoto lens so massive it required its own padded rolling case. She also carried a laminated itinerary that clearly stated 8:15 p.m., evening scenic cruising of Kilauea volcano. There was just one minor logistical hiccup that Brenda refused to accept. Kilauea wasn't actively flowing into the ocean that month. The volcano was dormant on the surface, entirely peaceful, choosing to keep its magma quietly underground. Nature was taking a break, but Brenda was absolutely not. Have you ever tried to explain geology to someone wearing a $2,000 silk resort caftan? It is a losing battle. On the afternoon of day 3, she marched down to the guest services desk, slammed her glossy travel agency brochure onto the marble counter, pointed at a tiny, heavily saturated stock photo of liquid fire, and demanded to know why the mountain was turned off. The extremely patient junior purser named Thomas tried to gently explain that the cruise line does not control the Earth's tectonic plates and cannot force a geological event on a Tuesday evening. Brenda didn't blink. She reached into her canvas tote bag, pulled out a highlighter-marked printout of the cruise contract, and claimed the line was in breach of an implied promise. When Thomas reiterated that the mountain was asleep, Brenda pivoted to her contingency demands. First, she insisted the captain sail the 130,000-ton ship directly into the restricted coastal zone to get closer to the heat source, in hopes of waking it up. When informed that was illegal and highly dangerous, she leaned over the desk and demanded that the ship's entertainment technician redirect the vessel's high-powered theatrical spotlights toward the shoreline crater, while simultaneously pumping thick theatrical fog from the upper decks to, in her exact words, simulate the ambiance I paid for. She argued that since she paid a premium for a portside balcony specifically for this 2-hour window, the crew had a contractual obligation to provide visual drama. The standoff lasted 45 agonizing minutes. The negotiation only ended when Thomas, looking profoundly defeated, offered her a complimentary plate of warm chocolate lava cake from the specialty steakhouse and a bottle of Syrah. She accepted the cake, ate it in the atrium lobby, and then immediately submitted a formal written grievance demanding a 50% refund of her cruise fare because the Pacific Ocean failed to provide adequate pyrotechnics. 2. Arthur, a retired municipal auditor from Nevada, loved pineapples with a passion that bordered on the clinical. When he booked a trans-Pacific crossing from Los Angeles to Honolulu, he fully expected to be drowning in premium local fruit from the moment he stepped aboard the 4,000-passenger vessel. On the second sea day, Arthur approached the buffet's breakfast station, inspected the perfectly cubed yellow mounds in the stainless steel trays, and narrowed his eyes suspiciously. He reached into his tactical cargo shorts and pulled out a digital bricks refractometer, a specialized optical instrument used by agricultural inspectors to measure the exact sugar concentration in crops. He placed a drop of the buffet pineapple juice onto the sensor, peered through the lens, and loudly declared the fruit a cheap mainland imposter. Now, tell me, how exactly do you argue with a man actively wielding agricultural testing equipment? You don't. For the next 3 days, Arthur refused to eat anything from the fruit station without conducting a full forensic audit. He would arrive at the buffet at exactly 6:15 a.m., bypass the line, and corner the food and beverage manager. He didn't just complain. He demanded that the executive chef produce the physical bills of lading and import manifests for the fruit supply. He aggressively argued that a ship heading to Hawaii had no business serving pineapples that originated in Costa Rica, treating this supply chain reality as a deeply personal insult. Eventually, Arthur set up a small staging area at a corner table, demanding the waiters bring him completely unpeeled, whole pineapples from the galley so he could personally inspect the crown leaves and skin texture before authorizing the kitchen staff to cut them for his morning yogurt. 3. The humpback whale migration off the coast of Maui is a protected natural phenomenon, which means the marine life operates entirely on its own unpredictable schedule. This biological reality was utterly unacceptable to 28-year-old Chloe, an aspiring lifestyle influencer from Miami, who had booked a premium whale-watching catamaran excursion through the ship. When she returned to the cruise terminal, she didn't look awestruck. She looked like she had just been served a tepid oat milk latte. She marched directly to the shore excursions desk and demanded a full refund, claiming the whales were lethargic and uncooperative. She didn't just voice her displeasure. She pulled out her tablet and presented a meticulously hand-drawn storyboard of the exact synchronized breaching sequences she needed for her social media reel. She explained with total sincerity that seeing only waterspouts and a few distant tail slaps was a literal breach of contract because the promotional video showed a whale jumping completely out of the water. When the excursion manager gently explained that these are wild animals and the cruise line does not employ marine choreographers to direct them, Chloe scoffed. She demanded to know why the ship hadn't sent a scuba crew down earlier that morning with buckets of premium chum to hype them up before the paying tourists arrived. The interaction finally ended when she asked for the direct contact information for the Hawaiian Department of Land and Natural Resources, fully intending to file a formal complaint against a specific adolescent humpback whale for failing to hit its marks and ruining her personal brand aesthetic. 4. Richard and Helen from Texas were the type of travelers who desperately demanded cultural authenticity, provided it was heavily sterilized, strictly air-conditioned, and catered entirely to their precise schedule. They booked the most exclusive shore excursion during the ship's overnight stay in Maui. The premium authentic Polynesian luau experience, which promised traditional fire dancing and a whole pig roasted underground in an imu pit. The friction began the second their luxury tour bus parked near the beach. Helen took one look at the torch-lit shoreline and immediately filed a verbal complaint with the local guide because the natural beach sand was too aggressively uneven for her designer orthopedic wedges, loudly asking if the staff could roll out a strip of artificial turf so she wouldn't get coastal dust on her fresh pedicure. Things escalated significantly when the traditional Kalua pig was unearthed from the ground. While the other 80 guests cheered at the cultural ceremony, Richard watched in visceral horror as the steaming meat was pulled from the layers of hot rocks and dirt. He marched straight up to the head chef, right in the middle of a traditional Hawaiian blessing chant, and demanded to see the USDA inspection certificate for the animal. Announcing to the bewildered crowd that his dinner had been buried in the dirt like a cheap time capsule, he demanded. The kitchen staff immediately grilled him a skinless chicken breast on a freshly sanitized George Foreman grill, stating he simply didn't trust meat cooked by the Earth's crust. 10 minutes later, Helen flagged down a waiter to complain that the smell of kerosene from the Samoan fire knife dancers was interfering with her floral perfume, asking if the warriors could switch to battery-operated LED batons. Exercising miraculous restraint, the local organizers gently suggested this specific event might not align with the couple's strict hygiene standards, offering a private taxi back to the pristine safety of the cruise ship. Richard and Helen gladly accepted and stormed back to the vessel, muttering about primitive hospitality. You might assume that returning to the air-conditioned safety of a premium aft-facing suite would end the drama, but if you've ever spent time around people who demand perfection, you know the night was just getting started. Richard felt completely cheated out of a feast. Back on the ship, he marched down to guest services and demanded the engineering team dig a small roasting pit directly into the teakwood of the Deck 9 pool area. When the hotel director firmly denied the request to drill a hole in a billion-dollar vessel, Richard simply decided to host his own civilized luau. At exactly 11:45 p.m., the bridge received a high-priority fire alarm warning from a smoke detector triggered in an aft suite. When two security officers sprinted down the hallway and burst into the room, they found Richard standing on the balcony in a plush white bathrobe, holding a heavy-duty hotel hairdryer in one hand and a smuggled travel iron in the other. He had stolen a massive 12-pound glazed ham from the late-night buffet, placed it on a silver room service tray, and was actively trying to roast the meat. He was pressing the hot iron directly onto the rind to sear it, while blasting it with the hairdryer to simulate an open flame. The intense heat had melted the sugary pineapple glaze, creating a thick, sticky, black smoke billowing up the back of the ship. Inside, entirely unbothered, Helen was aggressively weaving a traditional Hawaiian lei out of cocktail napkins and mint-flavored dental floss. When ordered to drop the appliances and step away from the smoldering meat, Richard stubbornly pointed a sticky, glaze-covered finger at the officer, demanding he take his shoes off before stepping onto the balcony because this was a sacred private ceremony. 5. Cruising the Hawaiian Islands guarantees some of the most spectacular evening skies on the planet, assuming you are capable of experiencing basic human joy. Margaret, a 62-year-old retired interior designer from Atlanta, was not. She had booked a premium balcony cabin specifically for the famous Pacific sunsets, but she approached nature with the exact same rigid expectations she applied to a corporate kitchen remodel. On the evening the ship departed Kauai, the sky lit up in a breathtaking natural display of amber and violet. 10 minutes later, Margaret was standing at the guest services desk, aggressively slapping a professional, leather-bound Pantone, color-matching swatch book onto the marble counter. She confidently flipped to a specific page, pointed her heavily jeweled finger at a vibrant tangerine shade labeled Pantone 16 1958, and loudly announced that the sunset outside was deeply defective. She pulled out the cruise line's promotional brochure, which featured a highly saturated stock photo of a Hawaiian dusk, and accused the company of blatant bait-and-switch marketing. She explained that she had coordinated her expensive evening wardrobe specifically to match the brochure's exact color hex codes, and the actual Pacific Ocean had severely underdelivered on the contrast. When the utterly baffled front desk clerk tried to explain that the cruise line cannot control atmospheric light scattering, Margaret scoffed, demanding a $75 onboard credit for the inconvenience of having to look at a mediocre, pastel-leaning sky that completely washed out her complexion. 6. There is a very specific type of beverage snob who treats their daily consumption routine not as a meal, but as a hostile hostage negotiation. Julian, a 30-year-old software developer from Seattle, was exactly this demographic. During the ship's first port day in Hilo, he bypassed the waterfalls and botanical gardens entirely, instead hunting down a highly exclusive $150 bag of single-estate Kona coffee beans. The next evening, he brought his prized beans to the main dining room, along with his own digital laser surface thermometer. He generously allowed the ship's waitstaff to use their hot water to brew his coffee in a portable French press he had brought in a velvet pouch, but only under his microscopic, relentless supervision. Now, I want you to picture the sheer atmospheric tension at this table. The dining room is actively serving 2,000 people simultaneously. Waiters are rushing around balancing massive trays of prime rib, and Julian is literally pointing a red laser at a glass carafe, counting down seconds on a specialized digital stopwatch. The situation escalated drastically during the crucial extraction phase. Julian suddenly gasped, waving his hands frantically over his coffee cup. He summoned the maitre d' and aggressively complained that the ambient air conditioning in the room was cooling the surface temperature of his brew at a rate of 0.4 degrees per minute, which he claimed was violently destroying the delicate flavor notes of the Kona roast. He did not ask for a different table. He looked the maitre d' dead in the eyes and demanded they temporarily shut off the central HVAC system for the entire 2-story, 5,000-square-foot dining room until he finished his beverage. When the maitre d' politely refused to suffocate thousands of vacationing passengers for a cup of coffee, Julian let out a theatrical sigh of martyrdom. He then proceeded to gather every single heavy, leather-bound dinner menu from the surrounding empty tables and constructed a foot-tall, wind-blocking defensive fortress around his coffee mug. He sat entirely inside this menu barricade, loudly demanding that the waitstaff walk at a significantly slower pace when passing his table so their movements wouldn't generate any disruptive microcurrents of air. 7. Not everyone travels to relax. Some people travel strictly to find things to be professionally outraged about. Have you ever met someone who learns exactly one piece of specialized trivia and instantly weaponizes it against the general public? Meet Gary, a retired homeowners association president from Arizona. On day 4 in Maui, Gary visited a botanical garden took a 2-hour guided walking tour, and suddenly decided he was the Pacific Ocean's foremost undisputed authority on tropical horticulture. That afternoon, he returned to the ship, marched straight into the main atrium, and began heavily scrutinizing the crew members. The cruise line had recently introduced a new casual uniform for the bar staff, a bright, cheerful, Hawaiian-style shirt featuring a repeating pattern of large red flowers. Most people simply saw a nice, festive uniform. Gary saw a biological war crime. He positioned himself by the martini bar, pulled a freshly purchased heavy hardcover encyclopedia of Polynesian flora out of his backpack, and flagged down the hotel director. With a terrifying level of bureaucratic satisfaction, Gary slammed the book open and proved that the specific flower printed on the crew's uniforms was actually a South American orchid, not a native Hawaiian hibiscus. He loudly declared this to be a disgusting display of cultural and geographical negligence that was actively ruining his immersive vacation experience. He didn't just want an apology. He formally demanded that the cruise line immediately recall and incinerate all 900 crew uniforms currently in circulation on the ship. When the hotel director diplomatically explained that they couldn't legally leave the entire hospitality staff shirtless for the remainder of the voyage over a botanical technicality, Gary threatened corporate mutiny. He marched directly to guest services, requested a pen, filled out a 4-page handwritten grievance, and officially demanded that his daily automatic gratuities be legally withheld and transferred directly to whatever land-based designer was responsible for defacing the ecosystem, completely satisfied that he had protected the island's honor from a polyester blend. 8. Avoiding crowded, tourist-heavy beaches is a completely understandable strategy when visiting Oahu, but the lengths to which some people will go for absolute privacy defy all rational logic. Greg and Susan, a married couple from Calgary, absolutely hated the idea of sharing the famous Waikiki sand with strangers, citing an extreme vocal fear of public bacteria. However, they still desperately wanted a romantic, oceanfront beach experience. During their port day in Honolulu, Greg rented a taxi, drove straight to a high-end landscaping boutique, and purchased 50 pounds of premium, sterilized white Zen Garden sand. Hauling a heavy sack of gravel through the cruise terminal security scanner raised some eyebrows, but it technically wasn't illegal. He dragged it straight into their premium aft-facing balcony cabin. His master plan was to dump the sand entirely onto the teakwood balcony deck, creating a perfectly sanitary miniature private beach right outside their sliding glass door. He spread it out evenly, put on his swim trunks, and lay down in the sun. The fundamental flaw in Greg's structural engineering project revealed itself about 2 hours later when the ship departed the island and hit a cruising speed of 22 knots. The open ocean wind tunnel instantly turned their private oasis into an industrial sandblaster. If you've ever tried to sweep sand off a hardwood floor, I want you to multiply that feeling by a factor of 10. Thousands of sterilized silica particles became airborne, violently coating their wet sunscreen, entirely clogging the sliding door tracks, and blowing straight into the cabin to cover their bed in a thick layer of grit. Furious that basic physics had ruined his afternoon, Greg called housekeeping and angrily demanded they come vacuum his balcony immediately, aggressively claiming the captain was driving the ship too fast on purpose just to ruin his romantic ambiance. 9. Theodore, a 64-year-old retired optometrist from Boston, booked a 15-night trans-Pacific Hawaiian crossing for one highly specific reason. He wanted to photograph the Milky Way and the traditional Polynesian navigation constellations from the absolute middle of the ocean. He packed over $20,000 worth of astrophotography equipment, including a motorized star-tracking tripod and a telescope the size of a small military torpedo. The problem with Theodore's plan was that he fundamentally misunderstood the concept of a modern cruise ship. He expected a dark, silent vessel gliding stealthily through the water. Instead, he found himself on a floating, neon-lit entertainment complex that radiated more light pollution than a small terrestrial city. On the very first sea day, Theodore marched down to the guest services desk at 10 o'clock at night, vibrating with rage. He slammed a star chart onto the counter and demanded to speak to the captain. He formally requested that the bridge immediately cut all exterior deck lighting, turn off the massive LED movie screen by the pool that was currently playing a loud romantic comedy, and shut down the ship's rotating navigation radar because the radio waves were theoretically interfering with his camera sensors. The incredibly patient night manager gently explained the basic principles of international maritime law, detailing how turning off navigation lights in the middle of a shipping lane is highly illegal and generally considered a terrible idea for the safety of 4,000 passengers. Theodore did not care about maritime safety. He cared about optical clarity. He argued that since he paid for a premium aft-facing balcony, he was contractually owed a mathematically perfect view of the cosmos. When the manager firmly denied the request to plunge the ship into total darkness, Theodore decided to take matters into his own hands. Have you ever seen a grown man apply industrial problem-solving to a completely irrational grievance? During the ship's first port day in Hilo, Theodore completely bypassed the volcanoes and waterfalls. Instead, he took a taxi straight to a local hardware store, purchasing 3 massive rolls of heavy-duty, opaque black construction plastic and 10 rolls of silver duct tape. That night, under the cover of darkness, he enacted his masterpiece. He intended to build a light-proof blackout observation tent on his balcony. However, Theodore was an absolute perfectionist. He realized that the light from the neighboring cabins would cause unacceptable ambient light bleed into his camera lens. So, leaning precariously over the glass dividers, he unrolled the thick black plastic and meticulously taped it entirely over the exterior of his balcony. But he didn't stop there. He aggressively sealed the plastic over the balconies of the cabins immediately to his left and right, completely encasing 3 separate rooms in an airtight, light-proof plastic bubble. The internal twist of this situation occurred at exactly 3:15 in the morning. The elderly couple in the cabin next door, Arthur and Helen, woke up to use the restroom. Arthur noticed a strange rustling sound, walked to the balcony door, and opened it, only to be met with a solid, impenetrable wall of pitch-black plastic. Genuinely believing the ship had capsized and they were currently trapped underwater in the dark, Arthur panicked and smashed the cabin's emergency medical button. Within 3 minutes, a medical team and 2 security officers sprinted down the hallway, swiped their master key, and burst into the room. Finding the couple in a state of sheer terror, the officers forcefully shoved the balcony door, ripping through the heavy plastic sheeting. As the cool ocean breeze and moonlight flooded the room, the officers looked to their left. There was Theodore, sitting in a camp chair next to his telescope, illuminated by the beam of the security flashlights. He did not ask if his neighbors were okay. He did not apologize for accidentally simulating a submarine disaster. Instead, Theodore aggressively shielded his eyes, loudly threatened to sue the security team for ruining his retinal dark adaptation with their flashlights, and formally demanded that the cruise line reimburse him for the $85 he had spent on the ruined duct tape. 10. Ronald, a 60-year-old retired insurance salesman from Ohio, possessed a culinary palate so aggressively bland that it practically required a medical diagnosis. We all know someone who refuses to eat vegetables, but Ronald viewed any food that hadn't been heavily processed in an American factory with deep, inherent suspicion. During the ship's port day in Kona, the executive chef had proudly sourced a massive, incredibly expensive, locally caught yellowfin tuna to serve at the evening buffet. Passengers were thrilled, lining up for the fresh, ruby-red sashimi and perfectly seared steaks. Ronald, however, stood at the front of the carving station with his arms crossed, glaring at the beautiful fish as if it had personally insulted his heritage. He flagged down the maitre d' and loudly complained that the tuna was too purple and lacked the structural integrity of a proper meal. He completely refused to eat it, but he also refused to eat anything else. He demanded that the chef take a premium $40 slice of the sashimi-grade yellowfin, place it on a cutting board, and use a plastic ruler to aggressively trim it into a perfect 4x2-inch geometric rectangle. He then instructed the horrified, classically trained French chef to completely submerge this pristine cut of fish into a thick batter, roll it in generic breadcrumbs, and deep fry it in industrial oil until it resembled a frozen supermarket fish stick. When the chef reluctantly presented him with this absolute culinary tragedy on a silver platter, Ronald took one bite, grimaced, and loudly declared that it still didn't taste right, demanding the cruise line radio, a mainland elementary school cafeteria, to get the correct recipe. 11. Bradley and Jessica, a deeply entitled couple from Chicago, possessed a spectacular ability to manufacture personal victimization out of their own financial decisions. To save money on their luxury Hawaiian sailing, they intentionally booked the absolute cheapest, windowless interior cabin on Deck 4. A room located so deep inside the hull, it practically shared a wall with the engine room. However, by the second morning, Bradley decided that dealing with the consequences of his own frugality was unacceptable. He marched up to the guest services desk, slapped the cruise line's glossy promotional brochure onto the counter, and pointed aggressively at a paragraph describing the healing restorative properties of the Polynesian trade winds. He confidently informed the manager that the recycled air conditioning in his interior cabin was entirely devoid of tropical ions, which he claimed was a blatant breach of contract. He demanded an immediate complimentary upgrade to a premium aft-facing balcony suite so his pores could breathe authentic ocean air. When the manager politely pulled up the digital manifest to show that the vessel was completely sold out at 100% capacity, Bradley simply rolled his eyes at the screen, waved his hand dismissively, and told the manager to evict someone less important. Refused and furious, Bradley decided that if the cruise line wouldn't give him a balcony, he would forcibly appropriate one from the public domain. Now, I need you to visualize the sheer physical effort required to execute this next phase. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Bradley and Jessica physically dismantled their interior stateroom. They dragged their massive, heavy, king-sized mattress off the bed frame, hauled it out the door, and slowly pulled it down the long, carpeted corridor. They shoved it into the glass atrium elevator, rode it up to Deck 10, and hauled it straight out onto the open-air pool deck. They meticulously set up their bedding inside a premium poolside cabana, complete with their cabin pillows, the duvet, and 2 stolen bathrobes. When the early morning deck patrol found them sleeping peacefully next to the main swimming pool at 5:30 a.m., the security officer gently tapped on the cabana frame to wake them up. Bradley did not scramble in embarrassment. He simply cracked one eye open, pulled the heavy duvet up to his chin, and loudly claimed he was legally exercising maritime squatters' rights over the cabana. He then pointed a finger at the utterly bewildered officer and demanded he stop talking, fetch 2 menus for room service breakfast, and go tell the bridge to drive the ship a little softer because the waves splashing against the hull were interrupting his deep REM sleep. 12. Patricia, a highly organized mother of the bride from Texas, was hosting a 40-person destination wedding group on the ship. She operated under the absolute delusion that purchasing 15 mid-tier balcony cabins granted her supreme executive authority over the entire 4,000-passenger vessel. She demanded the ship's main Lido deck pool be completely drained and converted into an authentic Hawaiian lagoon for the ceremony. Her official written request involved the engineering team dumping 3 tons of actual beach sand onto the fiberglass pool floor and releasing live imported koi fish into the shallow end. When the hotel director firmly denied this highly ambitious request, citing severe structural, sanitary, and animal welfare laws, Patricia did not accept defeat. She pivoted to a new, highly specific obsession. She decided the water in the ship's pools was too clinical and transparent and did not match the specific turquoise shade of the bridesmaids' dresses. She demanded the ship pump expensive, organic coconut water into the hot tubs to create a milky, tropical aesthetic. Refused again, Patricia decided to bypass the chain of command entirely and take matters into her own manicured hands. During the ship's overnight stay in Maui, she took a taxi to an industrial craft supply store and purchased 3 massive, 32-ounce bottles of highly concentrated, commercial-grade blue textile dye. At 4:30 in the morning, while the outer decks were completely deserted, Patricia and her incredibly reluctant sister sneaked up to the Lido deck. She systematically poured entire bottles of the industrial pigment directly in both adjacent hot tubs, fully expecting the water to simply adopt a pleasant, photogenic ocean hue for the afternoon ceremony. However, Patricia fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of commercial pool filtration. The ship's high-powered circulation jets instantly whipped the dye into a violently aggressive, opaque neon sapphire hazard. The real disaster occurred at 7 a.m. when her entire bridal party, entirely unaware of the midnight sabotage, decided to go for a celebratory morning swim. 9 bridesmaids jumped into the heavily dyed water. The industrial textile pigment, designed to permanently stain cotton and polyester, immediately bonded to their skin, their expensive blonde hair highlights, and their luxury white swimwear. They emerged from the pool looking exactly like a panicked group of glamorous Smurfs. When Patricia arrived on the deck an hour later to inspect her handiwork, she found the entire ship's maintenance crew desperately trying to scrub the permanently stained blue fiberglass walls of the billion-dollar pool. Instead of confessing to the chemical vandalism that had literally dyed her own daughter's bridal party blue, Patricia immediately marched down to the front desk. She slammed her hand on the counter and aggressively demanded a $50,000 settlement from the cruise line, furiously claiming the ship's toxic, overly aggressive chlorine balance had maliciously attacked her family's skin tone on the most important day of their lives. The ship isn't the problem. It just amplifies the bizarre control issues people normally hide behind closed doors. Be honest. Have you ever seen a family member act exactly like this over a minor inconvenience? Spill the details below. Subscribe and like if you prefer watching these disasters from the safety of your couch rather than being trapped in an elevator with them.